So, Jon, thanks for joining us today. I believe this is actually your third time appearing on our series, so welcome back, and thanks for coming back. For those that haven't watched those previous episodes, can you give us a bit of an intro into yourself and OSB Group?
Well, I take it that's a good thing, Mark, in terms of keep inviting me back. So I'm Group Managing Director of Mortgages and Savings at OSB Group. Been there for getting on for 3 years. So I'm responsible for all of the kind of the sales, mortgage proposition, savings proposition across the main brands that we have. So Precise, Interbay, and Kent Reliance are intermediaries, and then Charter Savings and Kent Reliance on the savings side.
So MagiClick and OSB have been quite busy over the last year or so, really rethinking and reimagining the Precise mortgages, digital channels and digital experience. And that's culminated in a number of big launches in recent months. And the first of those was the new Precise website, which launched in the spring, which also coincided with your launch of your new brand, which is, I think fair to say, quite a bold rebrand. How's it been received?
Yeah, it has been quite a journey that we've been on together, Mark, between MagiClick and OSB. Actually started with 3 things that we were particularly wanted to do. The first one we delivered together at the start of this year, which was actually the unified broker registration. So we're very conscious that we wanted to kind of streamline the experience intermediaries have with our various brands. And so we established a portal together whereby a broker registering can in effect just go, yep, I want to register with all 3, rather than have to go into Precise versus Kent or Interbay. And that was a bit of a game changer, because it kind of just meant that it opened up the proper experience of what we have within OSB, where we support kind of across those property tenures to intermediaries that maybe weren't aware, and we could do that quite easily. And it made it a lot more efficient at the back end as well for our teams to get all of those registrations in. That was kind of, our first step. The second step, which was probably much more kind of public, was, as you said, we set off on a journey to kind of refresh and revitalise the Precise brand, and develop a brand strategy, which we felt was truly kind of stand out for a very iconic specialist lender. And a key part of that was also making sure that the digital website experience was what we promised, which was that kind of no faff, easy to find your way through, access to kind of products and criteria much more easily. And we launched those 2 things together in March. And we did that having gone through kind of broker testing as well. And certainly both of those things have been really well received. The brand now, we think, stands out. It's a brand strategy is only as good as the kind of the way that you bring it to life, and we're on that journey. And we can talk about how we're kind of developing that. And the website, it certainly is much more easy to navigate. I think that the thing for me around kind of websites is you don't do it one and done. So we've continued to kind of get feedback from intermediaries and go, well, which bit worked for you well, which bit less so, and what can we invest in? And certainly we've kind of found some learnings there that we've worked on and continue to work on as well.
It's interesting you talk about the broker testing, and it's often the case when you look at these projects from the outside, people focus on the end result. But I always think it's interesting to delve into how you got there from a process point of view. So how did you engage with the brokers during the project, and was there any particularly interesting feedback or insights that you learned from them?
Yeah, I think, it's essential that you do that kind of broker feedback loop. I mean, we do challenge particularly the sales teams to be the walk in the shoes of the intermediaries. So their role on projects is very much to kind of go, how is this going to get received? So that is always a kind of interesting one to kind of navigate your own internal sales focused teams to kind of go, how do you think this will land? We certainly went through on this website all of the kind of mock-ups of the website itself, the journeys we tried to build with you as close to reality as possible, and to get intermediaries kind of finding their way through that. It meant that in certain instances we kind of reordered things. Clearly we talk about language being, it's simple things that get done. I think historically when we've worked together, it's always those kind of live test cases of intermediaries, not knowing they're kind of being filmed necessarily, but engaging with the technology that really brings it to life. And that kind of is really, really important. But I think also with this website, when we've done it, you never really know when you're getting some scale come through it, whether or not you get 1 or 2 or 3 brokers that kind of think that, flow through these things okay, but when you kind of roll it out to scale, there's a few areas that need to be tightened up. And actually, interestingly, on this one, particularly the criteria search for us was something we thought was simple. But in reality, the way it gets ordered, the way it gets filtered, what brokers particularly want to go looking for and have that really easily surfaced is something that we've kind of had to go back to and have another look through. Even if it's down to how you take lending policy and write it in a searchable way that is kind of useful rather than in policy language. Yeah. So it's sometimes it's less about the technology, it's more about communication, I guess. And the technology is a route to communication, but how do you improve all of that end to end? So I think I always take on the basis that says, feedback never stops. What's the old expression? Feedback is a gift. It doesn't feel like it at the time, but it really is. And so, we continue to iterate. Even now, we're kind of 3-4 months in. There's a whole stack of stuff that we still want to do within that kind of website experience, really.
And that brings us quite neatly onto the most recent launch, which was the mobile app. Which were, for our team, was really exciting to work on something that is genuinely unique and new to the market. Do you want to share a bit of backstory about how it came to be? Yeah,
as I said, the third pillar to the work that we were doing was the launch of that mobile app, and that's always something. Given that it's a first, you don't quite know how it's going to land, but you know that just at its heart, it feels like, if you can give intermediaries their own kind of virtual assistant that they've got in their pocket and travelling around and on tubes and trains and everything else, I think, the kind of advertising also used the word on the toilet, which I think is quite interesting for Precise. But anywhere those intermediaries are, you give them a virtual assistant. And you can't do that with kind of system portals. It just doesn't work like that. So what we did was, we kind of wanted to engage in going, right, okay, what would intermediaries find useful in that assistant role? Things like product updates, product withdrawals, where it's really important as well to be on the ball. And this one for us was about case updates. So we knew when we did the website, we would have loved to have kind of gone deep into the kind of processing systems and done lots of work there, but that wasn't the technical focus of the website. Whereas for the app, we thought we could really bring that kind of processing experience to life. And that's what we've done. We've delivered a virtual assistant. It's the UI is really interesting and engaging and useful. It does give case updates. So and it also gives case updates for Precise in whether you're doing buy-to-let or you're doing resi or you're doing bridging. And it's the first time that bridging community has really sort of seen those updates. Never had a portal before. Yep. So from us, so they get something they've never had, even if they're kind of sitting at their desks. And the initial feedback from it is kind of really, really strong. We wanted to give people reasons to download something onto a device, onto a phone, log in, register, which is simple. And already we're seeing intermediaries doing it in the hundreds. Kind of launched it start of last week, I think it was. So that's really, really good. And now it's just going to see, does it change the way that intermediaries think and work? Does it make them feel like they're more in control of their kind of cases with us and experience with us? And more importantly, does it enable them to provide their clients with a better service as well? Because they can give updates irrespective. You don't need to be in an office to do that. You can really feel like you're in control, which in a mortgage process is really important. Yeah. So from that perspective, we've invested in it. We've delivered it. We just want to see whether or not intermediaries use it as much as we think the value is in terms of thinking about how you can use it, really.
I think one of the things we learned during the broker testing was a number of things. The different brokers want to interact with you in different ways, and I think generationally there's been a bit of a shift from new brokers coming in the market that are much more sort of app native in terms of their digital experiences, not necessarily always being sort of desktop bound or laptop bound when they're placing business. Do you think that's also a bit of a recognition of the different changes in how generally people are working in the market, not necessarily always being in the office, but being on the move? And one of the pain points we're looking to sort of solve was around, or one of the opportunities was around real-time case notifications. That was probably the most beneficial feature that brokers are most interested in, I think, when we're scoping that. Do you think that's kind of a sort of a broader recognition of changes in the way we're working now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're kind of in offices or not in offices, or we're out to see clients, or we're definitely living life on the move. I think most kind of mortgage systems are very kind of desk bound, and that just doesn't lend itself to almost the ability to kind of think as well. We think when we're on the move as well. So having the ability to kind of take that experience, take that mortgage with you, and be much more kind of in control. As you said, Martin, the notifications was something that was really quite central to what we wanted to do. Otherwise, it kind of is a bit more flat in its experience. Product withdrawals are another one, because clearly brokers need to know what's happening, whether new products are coming, and or criteria changes. So we definitely didn't want to do something which was salesy and kind of we wanted it to be that full well-rounded experience. Sometimes you can't get hold of you kind of want to speak to an underwriter, but in this case you hopefully don't need to, because it tells you the underwriter is kind of informing you. In fact, that's where these case updates are coming from. So that's really helpful. I think it is a shift in the adoption of technology. I think that there is a lot of investment going on across the mortgage industry into technology, but sometimes you don't quite see where that is benefiting either intermediaries or their borrowers as well. You don't quite see that connection all the way through, and so it's very good to just deliver something kind of standalone in its own right, which has a clear kind of hopefully a clear benefit to people.
Yes, that probably sort of alludes to one of the big challenges in the sector has been around system connectivity and data transfer between different systems, etc. So a lot of work businesses have been doing in recent years has been quite internally focused. Has been getting that infrastructure right so that you can then go out and launch sort of more public-facing apps like this. So it's quite exciting to see that end result.
And the two things definitely go hand in glove. I mean, I think I don't mind saying we have had to work around some of the system kind of structures. I call it limitations, and they are limitations that we currently have in terms of some of those bigger mortgage systems. We've had to work around that to deliver this app experience. However, if you really kind of develop the kind of the end-to-end mortgage system and environment alongside this type of technology, then all of a sudden it comes together. It's much more you can get much more power. So I think when we're thinking going forward now about how you are investing in the overall mortgage technology, you've always got to think, well, how's it going to be experienced? And whether particularly in the retail world, obviously everything mainly does get experienced in the app. So when you're thinking about retail experience, it has to be kind of quite app native. What we've done here is kind of work with a more traditional system, and actually create it in a way that can be absorbed and kind of experienced by people in a modern way. So there's different ways of approaching it, I guess.
So I think it's fair to say, if we look at the mortgage market, if we go back a couple of years, it was a bit behind from a technology perspective. I think there's been a lot of investment and noise around changes in the market in recent years, new platforms, etc. The specialist lending market in particular has probably even been further behind the wider mortgage market. Let's just say it's been cautious in terms of its adoption of new technology. Why do you think that is?
I think there's always that kind of the fear of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, isn't there? Which is, the specialist market has been sometimes about complexity, about relationship and partnerships, and that sense of the personal engagement in a case to kind of make things happen. So I do think that as itself is an experience which sometimes is quite difficult to kind of replicate in a mortgage system. So quite a lot of the investment over the last few years from a mortgage perspective has been from those kind of high street lenders or the more mainstream lenders, which is basically trying to take friction out of a process and streamline and automate, but mainly for the vanilla, for those cases that kind of fit quite neatly into a very narrow box of so that kind of strip cost out, make things easier, has been the focus of investment, a lot of investment from intermediaries in CRMs. So again, in kind of case management, customer management, and that side of things, which is mainly in the intermediary market. We don't necessarily see it as clearly in the lender market. In sometimes I think lender systems get in the way of that good experience, and we're trying to overcome that. So I think that's probably why specialist has been kind of a bit of a watching and following. I think what we're now seeing is that even within the specialist market, there's quite a lot of activity on a mortgage which should be automated. Document management or kind of automated decisioning for more simple cases or a simplified part of the process, particularly around things like property. So I think what we're starting to see is a bit of a catching up from specialists in the wider sense, which can look at, actually, we don't have to automate the whole customer experience, but we should absolutely automate or simplify this bit, and this bit. I think we're also seeing ways in which technology can help that human interaction and collaboration. So we're seeing kind of tools which are able to kind of have areas where you can kind of shape or kind of share updates. I mean, there's some quite good things going on around blockchain in terms of case updates through a process that are being added in. So you kind of taking some of that sense away. I think we are investing in ways that the specialist lending criteria, which is its kind of secret sauce, if you like, is you can find a way to put that into rules without without kind of again, as I said, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You can kind of you can create specialized environments, and at the end of all of this, and this is I still don't see this happening enough within the mortgage industry. There is that sense that you can kind of create an offer for customers which is a bit more personal in terms of their experience. And what I mean by that is, we still see far too many products which are kind of 2 or 5 year, or we see lots of products which have a rate and a fee, and they're absolutes. You see products which either don't have any interest-only element to it, or the small amount. Actually, what I think borrowers at the end of the day and intermediaries want for their clients is a bit more personalisation. And I still think we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
We can use people to do a build a loan for somebody, and we can configure it almost in human terms. But what we will really want, I think, is to find the capability whereby some of those kind of elements of a mortgage can be personalised and change, to what a borrower might want. So again, you think about it from a kind of a product transfer perspective. Again, to what extent, again, it's a very simple, single product offer probably. Whereas really, what you want to do is go, actually, this has worked really well for me, but I don't want to go in for a full 2 year or 5 year. I want to do something where I can kind of flex the ERCs, or just some sense of kind of put yourself in control. I think a lot of those ideas probably weren't around when a lot of the current lending platforms are being developed. Whereas now they are being thought about and being kind of bedded into the way that people are thinking. And I also think Consumer Duty helps that as well, because it kind of says you've got to know that the product that you're putting together is what gives good outcomes and represents fair value. Well, you've got to walk in the customer's shoes to do that a bit. And if you can kind of just flex the offering, put the customer a bit and their intermediary a bit more in control, then you can be a bit more confident about that. I think technology is starting to do that in the mortgage space. It does it everywhere else. So I don't see why we couldn't follow it through.
It's actually quite a radical rethink of how mortgages work, really, in terms of how people have built them to this date. And I think we do a lot of work within the specialist mortgage or specialist lending market generally. And I think although there's a lot of talk of AI underwriters or articles that you read, in reality, that human underwriting element is as important, if not more important than ever. And the way we've approached it and the way we've been asked to sort of think about it is, looking at the steps in the process that are generating manual work for underwriters and other internal team members that they shouldn't really need to do, and then freeing up their time to add value where the human mind can really do when it comes to underwriting. And I think actually a small example of that would be the mobile app for Precise, that thing that you mentioned for bridging loans. For the first time, they can log in, see their cases, get real-time case updates. So there is a small efficiency gain there for both parties in terms of that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Brilliant. So lots on the roadmap for OSB. Is there anything you want to share before we wrap up for today in terms of?
Well, I think I've shared some earlier about, obviously we've got to bed the app in. We launched it last week. From a Precise perspective, we've got to see how people use it. And as I said, make sure that delivers the value to the intermediary. Lots going on the savings side as well in the second half of the year for OSB Group. And then 2025 is a big year for us with regard to kind of investing in that lending platform, looking at particularly looking at the way in which the kind of landlord property investor and their intermediary is engaging with the market. Obviously, we've gone through quite a lot of change within the buy-to-let market, and that professional landlord needs a different type of support, thinking about the way in which they've got more complicated property needs, or multiple properties they're trying to manage or do manage. So we've been doing quite a lot of thinking about that kind of property investor and the buy-to-let market. So that's particularly, obviously, it's core to what OSB does, as well as all the other different lending lines. So we've been doing quite a lot of thinking about how we can kind of better deliver against that kind of future change for landlords in the market as well.
Brilliant. Well, watch this space. Sounds good.
Well, maybe back for a fourth time, Mark.
Indeed. Well,
if possible.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much for your time today. And hopefully we'll catch up again soon in another episode.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark. And thanks to the MagiClick team as well for their support for us. It's really appreciated.
Pleasure.